I have no justification for why it took me this long to edit this video. But hello, hi, welcome back to the 8th and final video of my Learning Digital Art series, where I made an attempt at teaching myself to draw anime so that I could draw any fun art that I could possibly want. I will let the speed paint play on screen while I attempt to explain myself first and then reflect on everything I learned in those weeks of practice and maybe beyond that. Back in June, I posted my very first video. In that video, on the very first day after getting my very cheap and very second-hand tablet, I drew these 4 characters from imagination. It was, well, bad, but it could have been worse. In any case, after that, I continued practicing. I was redrawing the references of anime characters that I like. Then I was using photos of myself as references to draw other characters in it. So not exactly drawing from imagination, but also not copying references directly. I also did some drawings of Vocaloids purely from imagination, way later on, sort of a break when I was starting to feel burned out. And now, well, what I'm referring to as now was actually back in August. But first things first. I know I said I have no justification for procrastinating this video for so long, but maybe I kind of do. A huge part of that is me just being a lazy procrastinator, yes. I find the process of drawing to be pretty fun, even if the outcome isn't always what I envision it to be, but when it comes to everything else, I kind of lack the motivation. Writing scripts is okay, I don't love it, but I don't mind it that much. It's more of a matter of when I can find the time to actually sit down and do it. But then when it comes to the recording part and the editing part, I hate it because I know I'll have to edit the voiceover later and that involves having to listen to my own voice and I can't stand it. I keep pushing it off and off every single time just because I can't stand to listen to my own voice. But there's also another fairly big obstacle, my flatmate, who I refuse to let know I upload stuff to YouTube. He knows that I took up drawing some time ago and he's more than well aware that I'm a weeb, but uploading videos? No, I refuse. But we live in the same flat, we're flatmates, which means that if I were to record the voiceover while he's also here, he would definitely hear and ask me about it. That wouldn't be a problem if I had a normal person with a normal social life as my flatmate, but nope, he works remotely, he has working out equipment here at home, so he doesn't have to go to the gym. He doesn't really meet with any of his friends, they only have Discord calls sometimes to game. Whenever he does go out with them, it's for some reason always on the very same day that I am going out with my friends, and we live in the UK, in Europe. If he does leave the house to do grocery shopping, 9 out of 10 times he's back within 15 minutes, and that makes recording voiceover longer than 5 minutes very, very difficult. Over summer, he used to have to go to the office every 2 weeks or so I actually had a full day to myself when I could record while also working remotely, but my manager does not need to know that. But recently, he rarely needs to go to the office, and that is a problem for me, which is kind of the reason why this and the previous video for week 7 were so delayed compared to when I actually drew them. The fan art October videos were easier in that regard because they never took longer than 10 minutes or so. Well, I mean, I still blame my laziness for most of the procrastination part, but my flatmate shares some of the blame. Now that I've made excuses for myself, let's talk about art and learning. Just because this is the last video doesn't mean I became super skilled and pro and therefore can stop learning altogether. No, I just decided that 100-hour mark is a very nice place to stop at least this series and stop focusing on solely practicing the same things over and over again, which are the anime characters, and move on to drawing more for the fun of it while also practicing here and there some other stuff. I know it says week 8, but that's not entirely correct. I wish I could have the kind of life where I could dedicate 2 to 3 hours every single day for weeks on end to learning a new skill, but that's just not possible for me. Even if I had the drive for it, I'm still a working adult with other responsibilities. Even if I work remotely, I also have to cook and clean and eat and rest and indulge in all the hobbies that spark joy and meet with my friends sometimes. Whenever I need to commute to work, I always come back tired and I just can't bring myself to draw. There are also, better and worse mental health days, and that doesn't really help. My point is, I did not draw every consecutive day for those 8 weeks. Some days I did manage, some days I didn't. There was one time when I had to go on a trip for a week and I only did like one sketch on a plane at the time. I almost always took breaks after finishing the final day piece each week, purely because they took so long and I was exhausted by the end. I just needed a break. What is correct about it, however, is the timer right over here, because I counted every single day when I did active drawing towards it, and all the hours are also correct. So while my learning journey may have been closer to 12 weeks, if I count the breaks as well, the number of active learning learning days adds up to roughly 8 weeks. But what I think is more important than the number of days is the number of hours spent on learning a skill. I don't know if it's an actual thing with background research and stuff, but I know I heard at least a few times about the 100-hour rule. Basically, if you dedicate 100 hours to actively learning a skill, you will become better at that skill than 95% of the general population. Of course, that also includes the people that have never tried or even heard of the skill you're learning, so being slightly better than them is pretty much a given even after 1 hour of practice, but you get what I mean. As you can probably tell, for my final piece of the series, I decided to redraw the very first sketch I did digitally. It's just a random OC, and I already redrew her once on day 7, but I thought it would make a good comparison. I kept the pose and most of the original design pretty much the same, save for her hairstyle and her eye color, because I was still kind of scarred from realizing I was basically drawing an AU version of a Genshin Impact character. Okay, so question number 1. Do I think 100 hours is enough to learn a skill to a satisfying degree? I think so, yes. But it also depends on a definition of satisfying, which can be very different from one person to another. In my case, when I was drawing this back in August, I was happy with it. Kind of, sort of. I enjoyed seeing it come together, and I enjoyed rewatching the speed paint over and over again. And I also enjoyed looking at it in general. That is, until I went online and saw how amazing all the artists I follow are, which is a natural course of events. As long as it doesn't get you demotivated and doesn't push you into giving up completely, which I didn't do, I think it's healthy to remind yourself that no matter the improvement, there will always be more of it waiting. That's why I think setting the goal on satisfied with rather than happy with is a better option to go for, because after I finished it, even though I enjoyed looking at it at first, I immediately saw the things I didn't like, but was just too lazy to go back and fix it, or simply didn't have the skills for it. But I was still satisfied with the improvement I made from day 1 or even from the previous week at the time. Question number 2. Do I think the improvement is linear over the course of 8 weeks? God, I wish it was, but it absolutely wasn't. The improvement I saw in weeks 1 to 3 was huge, but in the later weeks it was much more subtle. What I mean by that is that rather than seeing the improvement of quality of what I was drawing, it was about how much easy drawing itself became. When I compared the last drawings of weeks 5 to 7, I'm leaving out week 6 because it was very different compared to other weeks, I would not say that what I drew in week 7 was better than what I did in week 5 on a technical level. Even if I ignore the backgrounds, which already make these two pieces very, very different, I'm more inclined to say I slightly prefer the one from week 5, but the price for that very small margin of preference was over 3 hours of work, and that's a single full body against 3 half bodies. In week 7, I was also at a point in my learning curve where even though I could see the mistakes, I didn't actually have the skills to fix them, whereas in week 5, immediately after finishing it, I still couldn't see the mistakes. I can see them now, but at the time I couldn't. Week 1 to 3 was leaps and bounds. Week 5 to 7, some improvement was made, but it showed mostly in the process of getting the drawing done rather than in the final result itself. And question number 3. Can anyone learn art, digital or traditional, in 100 hours? My answer? Yes, but it's a complicated type of yes. Everyone has their own starting goals, their starting skill sets, and their own methods. And the thing about learning anything, not just art, is that slight variations in any of those can alter the end result. Take my case, for example. I would say I had 2 cheat codes that I wasn't really aware of until I started thinking about it later on when people were pointing it out to me. Cheat code number 1, my academic background, and I mean my basic academic background, like primary and middle and high school stuff that everyone gets. I did STEM both in high school and university. I never took any special art classes, by the way. In week 1, I started from what I called level just slightly above 0. My basically non-existent art background consisted of what they taught us in school when I was a child and my geometry lectures at university where I had to draw like dozens of various 3D graphs in physics and maths. It also included my knowledge of the human body that I got also from biology classes back in middle school and high school because I have a fairly good memory. I explained some more on those 2 facts in videos for week 1 and 7 if you're interested, by the way. To me, as someone who grew up in that kind of education system that I had, it was standard to know these things because everyone was taught it. Everyone in my entire school had to sit through 2 hours of art classes a week for 3 years in middle school. everyone in my entire school had to learn about the human bones and muscles regardless of what course they were taking. Hence why for me, my skill level was effectively 0 when I started, because that, in my eyes, was basic level everyone was supposed to have at my age. But that's my background. This is, or I guess was, normal in my country. Someone who maybe didn't have compulsory art and biology classes in school, or maybe someone with just worse memory would struggle much more than I did. And then the cheat code number 2, my sports background. I know it doesn't make much sense yet, but hear me out. So I've always been fairly active in my life. I love doing sports, I did them at school, and I also did some dancing at some point in my life. But what does that have to do with anything? Well, it helped me develop what I call eye-to-hand coordination. You know how in PE classes, when you play basketball or handball, some people cannot for the life of them look away from the ball, or they will immediately miscalculate and lose it or kick it away? I never had that problem. Or if there are any dancers watching this, you know how when you practice a dance with a group, you do it in front of a mirror and you're generally not allowed to look around yourself because when you're on stage later on, you have to look at the audience. So you only really look at you and your friends' reflections in the mirror and adjust your movements based on what you see in the mirror so that you don't bump into anyone else. Yeah, I did that as well. And when it comes to art, you know how in the first week, in the very same week that I drew this abomination, I also drew this? That's where I think the eye-to-hand coordination comes in. Second drawing is obviously a straight-up copy or a redrawing of a reference I had open on my PC, not something I drew from imagination. But even then, and I was aware of this at the time, a complete beginner like me should not be able to copy something like this well. But because I had that eye-to-hand coordination, I can look at the reference on one screen and draw on the other screen without having to look at what I'm drawing all the time, and the end result will be good enough. It's another thing that, because I've been able to do that basically my entire life, kind of assumed everyone else could do it as well. It was only when my friend pointed out to me that that may not be the case, and that very much is not the case, I realized I just got lucky with my pre-existing skill set. And yes, I also type on my computer without looking at the keyboard. I think that's obvious by now. So yeah, I didn't lie when I said I'm just starting out with this, but I do recognize that I had certain knowledge and pre-existing skills that greatly helped my learning process. That being said, I also pretty much freeballed the whole thing without looking up any guides or tutorials or books, other than some random one-picture art shortcuts I randomly scrolled past on Twitter. Someone following an actual guide or a drawing course would do much better than I did, even if I didn't have any cheat codes that I had. And with all of that being said, let's compare. We have day 1, or maybe let's call it hour 1, which is this, no comments here. Then we have hour 10, also in week 1. And then we have hour 100. The images speak for themselves. I don't think I need to add anything else here. But I'm not done just yet. So another reason why this video didn't release last month like I was hoping for was because I felt like since I already postponed it for so long, it would feel underwhelming if it ended up having only the outdated content from months ago. Between this drawing of my OC and now, I drew some other stuff. I did random sketches and studies that wouldn't take longer than 10-15 minutes. I drew the Fun Arttober pieces, and I also started a sketchbook for traditional practice. Admittedly, the amount of time I could spare for practice over the last 2 months was much less than prior to that, because I got super busy with a project at work that I'm a part of. We got so busy at one time that I actually haven't drawn anything after that Fun Arttober video for day 7. I was planning on continuing this series even though October had already ended, but I got swamped with work and then it just didn't make sense, so I gave up. My sketchbook also has been just lying around unused since like the 10th of November because I just did not have the time for it. The only thing I did do in November was to polish up my Vocaloid drawings from week 6 because I wanted to print them. I didn't do much though. But my work has finally calmed down and I decided it's time to let my cat avatar Mlem, this guy, retire and draw my actual avatar for my profile picture and the future videos. And this is what you're seeing on screen right now. The previous speedpaint was from August at roughly 100 hours of practice, and this one is from the beginning of December, while I'm more or less at 150 hours into digital art. You know, there are still things I struggle with, like picking colors, or drawing and coloring hair, or fabric folds, but there are also things that I don't find as hard anymore, like sketching faces, or some not too extreme poses. This drawing isn't perfect, of course. I think the ear should have been a bit bigger and placed higher, but as of right now, it's still the piece I'm most proud of. I also forgot my rings and made the hoodie too purplish when it's supposed to be black. I am not an anime character, so I don't actually look like this, but I wanted to at least make the outfit resemble what I usually wear, and I always wear the same thing, so it's very easy. But oh well, that's something to fix in future works, I guess. Also, one thing I discovered between August and now is that I actually prefer coloring by hand rather than using the bucket tool, at least for illustrations. I still use it for chibus or for more cel shading pieces because it does make the process so much faster, but I like the texture that comes with coloring by hand. My file says it took me 4 hours to finish this, but I was watching something on YouTube at the same time, so I think 3 hours would be more accurate because I sometimes got really distracted and just wasn't working. Also, this thing was drawn fully from imagination, no references, not even for the pose. But I'm glad I never gave up. There was a time when I was feeling like quitting. It was during the busy period at work in November. I was feeling discouraged because I had this one and week 7 video just waiting to be edited, and they were reminding me that I'm really lazy. I was also feeling down about not having the time to practice at all and was scared that I'd forget everything I had learned. It was kind of like, what was the point in all that practice if I don't have the time for it anymore? What was the point if I'm just gonna go back to level 1 and I eventually find the time for it again? And you know, all the joys of being a working mid-20s adult in this day and age. But somehow I didn't go to level 1. I think art is kind of like riding a bike. You never truly forget how it's done once you get some of the basics down. So there you have it once more. 100 hours mark and a 150 hours mark. Take from this video what you will. You can decide if my process was fast or slow, if I'm a lost cause or have something cooking slowly. And that is everything from me. For now. See you in whatever comes next. Bye!